Hey, it's Ronsley. Welcome to episode number 288 of Should I Start a Podcast? Today, we're talking about making money from your podcast. As business owners, our main goal is profit. So today, you learn exactly how different business owners make money from their podcast, as well as the advantages of using LinkedIn for C-suite executives. If you need to contact them, we will take a deeper look at how to sustain the podcast, both creatively and financially, as well as we will hear about misconceptions about making money from your show, as well as using audio and audio equipment. We will also think differently about interacting with your guests before and after you interview them. All this and more on this week's episode of Should I Start a Podcast? Psst. Make sure you listen all the way to the end. I'll break down this episode to give you 3 small steps you can execute right now to help you take this listening experience into an execution experience. Enjoy the show.
Indicator 1, this is launch control. Please advise when pre-flight checklist is complete.
Indicator 1 to control. Pre-flight is complete. All indicators read green.
This is Should I Start a Podcast? A show for business owners looking for tips, tricks, and ingenious hacks when it comes to growing a business using their podcast. This is your host, Ronsley. He's interviewed more than 1,400 people and has been listened to over 5 million times in 133 countries. A TED speaker, author, and a podcast purist who believes that we can use our voices to grow our business and our influence. You know, because every conversion in any business always happens in a conversation. And now, Ronsley.
What I'd love to talk about today is making money from your podcast and how different people have different products or different services or different sponsorships or different ways that they go around monetizing in their podcast, making it sustainable, creating resources from it, creating relationships. That's my thoughts for today. Let's get into it. All right, let's talk about this. When this tends to happen with podcasters, I've been in the podcasting game 8 years. Anna's been 11, 12 years. And I think what tends to happen that we see a lot is podcasters start with so much enthusiasm and then find out that it's not sustainable because there's no monetary or there's no return on the investment that they have made. And the investment is different investments, whether it comes from time or energy or resources, patience, and it's just so many different things, right? So I'd love for anyone to start off this topic, because let's start off with the idea that why is it so hard for us to kind of go down the path of monetizing a podcast? Because it seems to be hard. Yes?
You know, Ron, it's really important for people to recognize that to monetize, you have to have a product. And if you really want to be able to scale your income without scaling your workload, you need to make sure, at least in some capacity, that product has a digital component to it, especially if you're focused on a big impact. You want to help a lot of people around the world. So we see so many people, you and I do, who don't have a product developed. And if they do, they don't have a digital component to that, which means they're constantly on the brink of burnout. And I think that once you've got those things dialed in, making sure you allocate some time every single week on the sales and marketing side, because as creatives, it's very easy for us to focus on doing all the creating and filling up our entire week doing the creative stuff, rather than do those revenue generating activities that are actually going to move the needle for us and help us drive our business forward.
I agree. I think it's even sometimes hard to devote ourselves to doing the creative week after week if we feel like nobody's listening or nobody's watching. But I do want to say, as a consumer of podcasts, it's interesting because I love getting excited about a topic. And one of the first places I go is Overcast to see if there's something about that topic, whether if there are podcasts about that topic. And especially, for example, launching a food brand, there's a ton of CPG, consumer packaged goods podcasts out there because there's a lot of independent food companies trying to do the same thing that I'm doing. And it's interesting because I want to learn everything I can about this. And so what a better way to learn about people in your industry than to hear different interviews on podcasts. So as a consumer, even I get a bit crestfallen when I find a podcast that I like and I see, okay, right now it's August of 2021, and I see that they haven't put out a new episode since maybe February. So even I am like, they're not putting out new episodes. Like even I'm putting pressure on people. But you have to put that same pressure on yourself because it is such a thing that it has to be updated. And I guess it's just finding that curve, jumping the curve of the bell curve where you can get to from the other side of, I'm not going to make enough episodes to, I'm going to continue to make episodes and then eventually put it all together now that we have an audience into pursuing monetization ideas. And by the way, it's easier to monetize now more than ever because companies understand the benefits of podcasters as influencers, paying them to do things. So back in the day, I remember writing Squatty Potty like 8 years ago. And after they had advertised on Howard Stern and being like, hey, we're not Howard Stern by any means, but we are a podcast and we have such a loyal, devoted fan base. And they luckily wrote me back, and other places wouldn't write me back. But Squatty Potty, I was able to get to write back because I feel like there's some certain brands who are kind of on the forefront of that. But you could literally just write a brand and be like, hey, I bet 500 people who listen would buy your product. So I don't know, just putting that out there. But you do have to get past that mental bell curve of like putting enough content out there regularly and then feeling like, okay, it's time to start monetizing.
Yes, I totally agree with you on the understanding the path. So it's not you start a podcast and you go straight into monetization. You start a podcast, you build an audience, and that's like the first part of your aim and goal. I find a lot of people I speak to, clients, as well as from my own experience as a podcaster, kind of one of the first things you think about is, okay, well, I'm going to make money out of this. How am I going to make money out of it? And a lot of the discouragement comes in from not being able to do that right off the bat and struggling with other things that you didn't expect. Like, I don't know who said it, but feeling that you're not being heard or seen. And then once you actually understand that you have to build an audience first, really learn what they need, their pain points, then you can develop, for example, the digital product that James was talking about. And then I think there is still a big misconception about how that whole thing actually works. And people are still thinking, okay, I need to either get a big sponsor, and then they look at download numbers and they get crestfallen because they think I need millions and millions of downloads. Or they think, yeah, that's basically what they focalize on. Or they go for something like buy me a coffee, buy me a pizza. And that's literally brings in not enough to make a living off.
I think as somebody who we're probably similar, pretty driven, pretty enthusiastic, I'm trying to kind of reframe this. I'm a psychotherapist by training, and that's my full-time gig. But I'm trying to reframe this in that you never know who's listening. And I've had this lovely connection with so many of my guests. And I have to believe, and maybe someone will say, you're just living in twilight somewhere. But I also have to believe that what other successful people are saying, and that is, it is really a long game. And I am trying to really appreciate how many downloads I have, which are, they're good, they're respectable. They're not millions, but they're growing slowly. And I think for me, and maybe this is not a popular perspective, but I think my biggest challenge is to be patient and know that I've been at this for almost 4 years. And as I said, I'm so happy to be in 98 countries. I'm really trying to appreciate what I have and also the relationships I'm making.
Totally understandable. I think being in that space is great. I mean, the enthusiasm is amazing. And I think that's what Anna was talking about, I believe, earlier in terms of the creative part, where we don't even get the chance to do that after a while, primarily because either the enthusiasm is kind of taken away, or there's something else that's happened, or there's other things that happen in life that kind of like derail us a little bit. But let's talk about that. How can we sustain our podcast? Because sustainability of our podcast comes from various different things, including enthusiasm. So it's huge in terms of being able to love what you do and be grateful for what you have. But the sustainability part is what I'm concerned about, because I know of so many people who love nothing more than to make their podcast, and then different circumstances don't allow them to do that, because in my opinion, there are so many moving parts and moving plates and spinning plates that we've got to do from a podcast angle. There's the creation, there's the recording, there's the editing, the production, the marketing, the social media, the sound checks. There's a whole bunch of different products. We're talking about monetization right now, sponsorships. It's different. There's so many different moving parts, right? So how can we sustain our podcast better?
Yeah, so hi everyone, Nikita. I would definitely say for sustaining podcasts, you really have to come at it from what feels good for you. So understanding that what works for your podcast is not going to work for every podcast, and what works today may not work a week from now. So being aware and being willing to shift and make any adjustments that's necessary. Also being willing to reflect when it's necessary. So after, in between seasons, or when you're getting feedback from your listening audience, really thinking about like, where do you want to go with this? How is this feeling? What are you wanting to change? Because for a lot of folks, there's very few podcasts I think that are exactly the same as the day they started. And if you try to do that, then I feel like you're going to become inauthentic. And I'm really about being in alignment and authenticity. So making sure that you are staying true to yourself and your beliefs and being open to shifting and changing, I think is one of the keys to sustaining in podcasting. So that's the woo-woo version for me.
I'd love to piggyback on Nikita. That was beautiful. Yeah, for me, sustainability comes with knowing why I do something and why it matters to me. And someone gave me really fantastic business advice years ago. They said, your business is there to serve you, not the other way around. And that was a really helpful mindset shift for me because I had gotten so stuck in okay, I need to do this to deliver this thing for other people that I had forgotten why I was doing it myself. And that for me has always been my reminder to go back to my core of okay, why am I doing this? For me personally, I do my podcast because I have so much that I want to share with people and I want it there for posterity. I want it recorded. I want it so that I can send any random person who asks me, hey, how do you do this full moon ritual for your partnership? Or, hey, how do you have better orgasms? Hey, I got an episode for you. Let me send it to you. So I like to be able to give people a resource of something that is everything that I really care about a particular topic. And that's why I do my show. So going back to your why and knowing what matters to you, I think is the key to sustainability.
On the sustaining your podcast financially and creatively, to me, a lot of it comes back to raising your idea of what's possible for you financially. As I think it was Kat who mentioned earlier, everyone's so focused on doing things like buy me a coffee and look, I'm hoping I can just cover costs. But if you've got a specific monetary goal in mind and you emotionally attach yourself to what that is going to allow you to create in the world, the impact that you want to have and who that's going to help, it's going to be so much easier for you then to put in the hard yards and figure out the plan and be resourceful enough to get the right people around you and resilient enough to continue when you have those days, like Anna said at the very start, like when you just don't feel like turning up to the microphone. So being around a group of people who can massively raise your idea of what's possible is such a simple but such a significant shift from the mindset required for scarcity versus abundance. And I know it's a little bit airy-fairy to say stuff like that, but I genuinely believe that's true. And I think it's one of the biggest mistakes people make, professionals versus amateurs in any field.
I'd like to make a remark there because I think, James, to actually go a little deeper into what you said, because I really, really love what you said. I think that you need to create a tribe, if you will, aside from your listeners, but the people that are in your ecosystem, in this case, podcasting, that you can buddy up with, that you can talk with, that you can get frustrated with, that you can have that glass of wine with, that you can join the mastermind with. I know James and Ronsley have those. I think that there's tools out there to help you elevate your game so that you can sustain. I know that for me personally, I'm not going to lie, I definitely have my roller coasters on it. Like I have days where I'm flying high and, oh, I'm a top podcast. I got this going on, that going on. And then there's just some days I'm like, geez, I don't know. I'm not finding the right people that I want to have on here, or I didn't feel as though the last interview or two were up to par. Like I think there's so many different things as a podcaster that you go through. But I think at the end of the day, finding your tribe, finding those people that you can grow with, or when you're stuck can sort of help you figure out what you could do next. Like somebody you could brainstorm. Like I could call James and say, James, like I need to brainstorm, grab your wine kind of thing. Like I think you need to have that. Good. I might need that actually, James. I mean, sometimes we just need that. Sometimes we just need to blow off a little bit of steam about the process. Like something small can set you off. Like you could work really hard day after day putting out your product, and then you realize like everybody that you have on your show is just clicking the little like button when you're on LinkedIn and not helping to further the message or get other people to subscribe or listen to that particular episode. And so you feel frustrated. You're like, why did I do all this work? They didn't even do anything with it. So I think there's a lot of little moving parts in there.
You know, there's a word that's come up a fair bit today, and it's the word process. It's like when we have those feelings and those different situations that happen in our podcast that we feel are taking away our positivity and our energy in the present, what can you do to update your process when you have a situation like that? Like when you have a guest on the show, if you feel like maybe it wasn't as valuable as it could have been, or there was an issue there where even from a recording perspective, but thinking about what can you do to update the processes that you have. Maybe it's checklists, maybe it's your questions that you use as like a question bank that you can use as a bit of a foundation to explore before you have guests and things on the show. Like to be totally honest, I finish almost every single one of my interviews on the podcast, and at the end of it, I feel frustrated because I feel like it wasn't as valuable as it could have been. And I get down on myself always for like 5 minutes at the end of each podcast. And then inevitably when I play it back and try and find those excerpts, which are going to be great clips for social media, I think, wow, there's actually some really great stuff in here. And if there was anything that I've noticed that I can update, or what questions led to better responses, then I can start to slowly tweak that line of questioning to add more and more value over time. So on the condition that you have those feelings, and if you are in a position to be able to make positive change, go and do that to the process that you have. So even if it wasn't the best thing in the present, you can keep moving forward with your podcast to a more and more valuable episode, because over time you're going to have a kick-ass podcast.
It's fascinating. I love the honesty there about 5 minutes. I doubt it's just 5 minutes, James, at the end of the podcast. That's
probably, yeah, you know me better than that. It's probably a lot longer. Rons, what about you? You've interviewed thousands of people. How do you feel once you've had that interview done? Are you usually fairly satisfied with that because you've done it enough? Like, you've interviewed a lot more people than I have, but I've still interviewed, hundreds and hundreds of people at this point. How do you feel at the end of a podcast interview?
Yeah, James, it's fascinating because it's different in different situations. Like, I am not necessarily as focused on the content, unfortunately, as much as that's the right answer to say. I'm actually more focused on the conversation and the person and the relationship. So if by the end of the conversation, I want to feel comfortable with my guest and the guest, I want my guest to be comfortable with me. And usually if that doesn't happen, then yeah, it's like I could have asked better questions is what my thought process goes down, because I feel like my only job as a host is to get their story, and to get their story, I've got to make them comfortable, and for them to be comfortable, the relationship or the chemistry needs to be there. So I actually never broke it down to that level before.
Group therapy.
Well, this is exactly what I talk about in my book. I'm a therapist, and I would say that it's an emotional experience that you're sharing with your audience. And I think that's very different than necessarily, I used to think, oh my goodness, people are like talking to me. Let me sort of get every bit of information and history I can possibly kind of milk out of it. But now what I do is really focus on the connection. And if I'm really in sync with them, if they're feeling understood, and if they're opening up, and it really leaves me so exhilarated. Some of them are better than others, of course, and some of them better energy and all that. But mostly I feel like I'm so excited to have spoken to someone across the world and listened to their story and had them reveal themselves in a way that I think the audience will really resonate with.
I couldn't agree more. And you know what? I think I kind of came about this naturally, but I realized it became a thing because I agree on focusing on the connection with an interview, especially somebody who you may or may not have worked very hard to get, or someone who may or may not be fairly, I don't want to say high profile, but maybe they're a good get for whatever your podcast is or whatever your industry is, or somebody whose information, their time is limited. You definitely focusing on the connection is very, very important. And then what I've done, so this is like, now I'm aware of this, but I wasn't aware that I was doing it at the time. Focused on connection, had a great chat for an hour. And then at the end was like, oh my God, forgot to hit these couple of points. Would love it if you would come back on and we have another episode to do, and literally get them to commit on the air. Because if they've had a good time, they're going to have no problem going, I would love to come back and talk to you. And you can sense it out. You can use your intuition to know. I would never say that to somebody who's like, obviously like doesn't want to be there, which really doesn't happen. We have a good time with the guests who come on. But I've used that kind of subconsciously, and then realized that I was publicly making them commit to doing another episode at some point in the future, and then follow up, of course.
Yeah. Hi, guys. My name is Bettina. I'm talking the first time on Clubhouse, so it's a bit exciting for me. So I wanted to talk about it. Storytelling is my background. I was a TV producer, and now I'm in education. And I realized that you talked about the 3 C's, like the content, not so much about the content, but context and connection. So when I teach drama or how to create drama, I go to do the interview question from Marcel Proust. And these are the questions I'm going to use for the interview guests on a podcast interview. So this has nothing to do with the actual content, but a certain level of excitement and curiosity with the guest. And I don't know if you're familiar with those, so maybe you want to Google those. And they are just completely out of context. So they're really, what's your favorite color and what's your hero in history? But that brings the connection to that person, and so also the connection to your audience. So I just wanted to share that. Thank you, Bettina.
Bettina, what was that resource again? What?
Yeah, sorry. That is Marcel Proust, and they used it as an entertainment in the 19th century in France, in the salons. And they just asked, it's 40 questions, I think, or there are several in the internet you can find, but it actually starts with what's your favorite color and then goes all the way down what's the hero in history you would have liked to be, what do you admire most. So what's your favorite writer? So it has nothing to do with the actually content you are, trying to sell maybe, but you can make a connection. You look at the 40 questions and look how you make then the story arc back to what you actually want to talk your interview guests about.
That's fantastic, Bettina. That is so great. The Proust questionnaire. Did you guys remember Inside the Acting Studio? James Lipton used to ask that at the end of every episode of Inside the Actor Studio. And I loved it because, like you said, you kind of get to know the inner workings of people. And Minnie Driver is doing a version of that on Mini Questions, her podcast. She's doing only 7 questions. But I think it's at the end of Tim Ferriss's podcast. He asks all of his guests, what would you put on a billboard? And so things like that, I think that's fantastic. I completely forgot about that because the other thing that we do too as listeners is we sit and answer them in our heads. How would we answer it? So it engages the listener and you get to know the person who's being interviewed. That's awesome.
Hey, this is Elizabeth Mcintyre. I'm the CEO of Think Brick Australia, host of our podcast and leader of Amazing Humans. I'm on the inside of We Are Podcast members, or as we like to call it, the Whamily. If you are thinking about growing that business using your podcast and your online presence, come join us on the inside. I would love to meet you. James and Ronsley coach us to get those recurring results in our business. If you want that roadmap, which we all follow to get those recurring results, you can download it at roadmap.wearepodcast.com. Now, back to the show.
I maybe want to talk about misconceptions because a lot of them came up in a variety of different conversations that we've had, here right now over the last half hour in terms of misconceptions that people make when they come into podcasting, and especially from a sustainability standpoint, right? Especially for creating a podcast that actually matters. So let's talk about that. Like maybe there are some misconceptions that you just wish you wanted to get off your chest.
Okay, I'm going to jump in on this. I think there are so many misconceptions. And one of them is the actual process of recording, the technical side to it. This is just because I've got like a background in audio editing. So it's not that straightforward to make a really good sounding podcast. And I think just because we've been speaking about interviewing techniques, it's actually hard. Like it's not an easy thing for everyone to just have a conversation and have that really authentic sharing of experiences and then drawing out the most important points from that. So while you've got to focus on that, you also then have to edit it afterwards and get it sounding on like a level, and we've spoken about this, that sounds professional, that people can listen to without being bothered by certain audio glitches, if you like. So I think those 2 points, just from a starting point of view, getting those right, and many people thinking that I actually did a quick video on this, like you just either use your computer to record or you just plug in a mic, record and go and have a chat and then put it on air. It's not quite like that. But yeah, I thought I'd just raise those 2 points.
I was going to add to that in terms of it's not as easy as plug in and speak is I think that to get a really good interview, you have to know some things about your guest that require research, and it takes time, and it's not always that fun or interesting. Or I look at people's Twitters, I look at obviously their websites, what they've done, and if they've done a documentary, I watch their documentary. It can be hours. So I think that there's a misconception, as Katerina said, it's just like you do this thing, you plug it in. I think maybe that separates some people who don't survive because the stuff isn't that good. I think it really shows if you do your research and if you do have some basic interviewing skills, hopefully we all rise to the top in doing our homework. But I found that if I have like some information that may not be readily available and I can talk to people about their lives in ways that haven't been talked about a million times for them, it really creates a very much more unique experience, hopefully for my audience. Thanks, Nicole. I'm done.
I was going to say, I'm really happy you brought that up, Nicole. Like that preparation, if you do that it's going to put you on the fast track to developing an actual friendship with that podcast guest who beforehand was probably a stranger. And if they are influential and you've got your show coming out on even a semi-regular basis, what those relationships will be able to do for you and your business will be worth the ROI of you having your podcast before anyone even hears the episode. And I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions about podcasting too.
Thanks for saying that, James. I just had an experience with somebody who wrote a book. He's a professor at Stanford University. He's a psychologist. Really interesting book about something called life review. And my podcast is for middle-aged folks and older, so it's really relevant. But I had this lovely talk with him, and I told him at the end, we were off mic, I said, ultimately, I really want to be on National Public Radio in the U.S., public radio. And he said, well, I'm in contact with those people all the time. They call me all the time for commentary, and I'm going to mention your name. And, I almost fell off my seat. But that's exactly the kind of thing that I'm sort of fostering and hoping for.
So true. Times that by 50, like with 50 guests, yet people out there who don't understand that process of doing the preparation and establishing a friendship and having a specific ask when people say, how can I help you? Because of all the work that you've obviously shown, Nicole, through all the research that you did on that guest before they came on the show, how much you valued that person's friendship or to drive it towards a friendship. It means they're far more willing and in fact will initiate the how can I help you question. And if you do that with 10 guests, 20 guests, 50 guests, things absolutely take off. And it's those relationships that I believe are the great amplifier for our podcast, for our business and everything else in our life. So I really love all that, Nicole.
Thanks. That's what I'm counting on.
I think there's two sides to that too. I've said from the very beginning, I don't understand why more people don't own a mic, because nothing kicks a door open like a podcast. And you can do it for intrinsic value. You can do it because you want to meet certain people that you admire. You want to learn about something that you've always found of interest, and you want to speak to the people who are experts at it. But if you approach it for business, and that's what the title up here says, is podcasting for business. If you are wanting to do this for your business, the opportunity to slide into somebody's DM on LinkedIn that's in the C-suite, it's amazing how quickly you get results when you're inviting them to a podcast. I mean, bottom line, that might be the main reason why you want a podcast. It might not just be because you want to talk about, I don't know, the care of dogs or whatever. It could be really for business purposes and not just intrinsic.
Yeah, I'd just like to add to what Holly said, and this is even before I officially thought I'd like to produce any content for anyone. It's exactly that way. It was just by doing podcast episodes, just interviewing other podcasters and doing all the prep beforehand, going the extra mile in how I produced the episode and all the pre-release and release promo material that they got back to me and said, we'd really like to have a chat with you about how you do what you do. And that kind of got me thinking, okay, this is how it works. It's not necessarily just you talking about your business or new products or anything. It's through interviewing other people, maybe in your niche, maybe not in your niche, but then that connection you establish, there's really nothing you can compare it to. It's definitely not a phone call. It's definitely not an email. It's a really close connection if you do it right, if you get those prep steps. And also just in the interview itself, being able to let them open up and make them comfortable, then that can lead to a lot of other possibilities and opportunities that you didn't think was possible before.
Thanks for sharing that, Katharina. I have a question to everybody because I'm a filmmaker, so I always film the first take and film the rehearsal. So are you doing a pre-interview before you go on interviewing them?
So Bettina, the reason why I said yes and no is that not everybody will take a discovery call or prep call or whatever you want to call it. I do try to see if I can bank 10 or 15 minutes prior to the actual podcast with somebody, because I really do want to highlight them well. And I really do want to try and draw out what the story is and maybe have a conversation back and forth about what types of topics we could really dive into and do well at it, really create something good, really special. And I've had a lot of people say yes, and they'll jump on with me. And I will say that those are some of my better podcasts because I feel like we've also gotten past that initial introduction of each other. It's not like we're just boom going into an interview to strangers. So I think it kind of accomplishes a little warmth between us, just sort of making it feel like more familiar. And you learn a little bit about their cadence and how they speak. Some people will go on really fast, and some people will have more of a measured quality about their speaking. So I think it makes for a better podcast when I can do it. What I will say is that, time is very precious to people, and very often, probably better than 50% of the time, people will say, I really don't have time to do that as well, but I would be open to emailing a few topics. We can kind of go back and forth a little bit. And then I'll do that. And I'll try and capture an interview they had with somebody else so that I could listen to their style and some of the things that they spoke about that I could tell they got excited about, that maybe I could lean in on myself and maybe go a little deeper. So that's where it's yes and no for that. I think if you can, and the other person is willing, it definitely makes for a warmer type of interview. But it still works if you can't do that.
Yeah, and I also want to add to that, Bettina, because I kind of lied a little bit that I don't do that. Because before COVID and before I've been grounded here in Australia, my show, The Psychology of Entrepreneurship, was interviewing people in person, flying to wherever they were and doing the interview. And it would land up becoming a 2-3 hour escapade. So it was like more of a coffee and then a conversation, and then it would be an interview, or they would invite me to their place. I was interviewing someone, and then I asked for them to be on my show, The Psychology of Entrepreneurship, and I say I do it this way, and they invited me to their house. And this person is like very popular author. And I was like, oh, wow, that's crazy. So I think that doing the pre-interview in different ways is possible. I think because now everyone's sort of got onto Zoom, the pre-interview happens on Zoom, and it's not really that much fun. It's more like, oh, you're wasting my time sort of thing. So we kind of make up for that by preparing really well and listening to other stuff that they have done, which James does an amazing job with and Nicole does an amazing job with, to prepare and listen to what they've done before, so that you don't need to do that pre-interview, I suppose.
Yeah, thank you both. That was really giving a big insight into the journey. I'm just thinking if you might then think, oh, I wish he would have said that, or she would have said that the way they said it in the pre-interview. So this is when I was filming, I always did shoot the rehearsal.
Bettina, it's good to hear your voice for sure. I want to quickly end this conversation on what James was talking about earlier, and it was the ask and all the stuff that we have, all this relationship building or sustainability of the podcast and creating this connection and everything. They're all great. And at the end of the day, it's all about the ask. It's all about when someone asks you, what can I do for you? Do you have something that you say back to them? Or do you ask your audience for stuff? Or do you and I think the ask becomes quite weird because first of all, it's scary if it's not done right. Secondly, it's douchey if it's done often. And a lot of times, you waste time by asking the wrong people. So I wondered whether we could have a conversation about asking better, because I can tell you there's lots of times that people have said, hey, Ronsley, what can I do to help you? And I haven't had the best sort of response. So this is more therapy for Ronsley.
I can give an example of a good ask. So first of all, before any of that stuff, always make sure you focus on the give before the get, because the give ironically leads to the get. But if you start off with the get, the person is not going to want to help you. So always focusing on what you can do to give, and really overdo the give that you're giving to the other people, which will then set them up to say, what can I do to help you? And because you've actually helped them, they'll be far more likely to go ahead with it. Following up is a really big one once you've already got one. But I wanted to share a quick story about when I was at a mastermind in Austin, Texas a couple of years ago. And they went around this group of all fairly influential entrepreneurs. And it was one ask that you had for the group. Now, my ask was to be speaking on stage in front of 100,000 people in that year. And it wasn't a very good ask. And then there was someone else there who said, I am a chiropractor and I make these pillows to help people sleep better. I know that Tony Robbins has got this thing in his neck that's really causing him a lot of pain for many, many years. I have a pillow and something that will be able to help him. If someone is in a position to be able to connect him with Tony Robbins, I promise you I can change his life. And there was someone there in the room, a guy by the name of Joe Polish, who has something called the Genius Network, who connected this doctor with Tony Robbins. And sure enough, it changed Tony Robbins' life. And now this person, the doctor, has endorsements from Tony Robbins and introductions to former presidents and anything else that you could possibly want with that level of influence. That's a very, very specific ask. It came from a very safe space of people who wanted to help, and it was an influential room because it was also a big ask. That person had built up enough social capital and had the runs on the board to be able to do that. And my ask just fell flat. It just fell dead. It just wasn't a good ask. It wasn't specific enough. And I often think about that example, and having something like that you can genuinely do to provide support to other people. It doesn't matter how high up the food chain they are, but it's an interesting story, that one. I hope you found it valuable.
Extremely valuable, because I think asks come in so many different ways, right? We ask on our show for our audience to rate and review, if that's still a thing. We ask for guests to be on our show. We ask for different things. And if you're starting a podcast for business, probably covering stuff where you ask better. And I agree with you, James. I think if you give better, you get to get better, I suppose. But at the end of the day, we all have to agree that we are not good at asking for help. We are not good at asking for lots of things. But I think the ask is a really interesting one, because I would say that a lot of very, very close people don't know how to ask even their closest people for help, or ask for something that they really want. I want to say that the tweetable from today's Clubhouse is from Holly. Nothing kicks a door open like a podcast. So please, everyone, join us at the same time. Nicole, please join us. Love to have you. Bettina, Rebecca, as always, really good to have you. Holly, Katharina, Anna, James, always just a pleasure to hear your voices every week. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Ronsley.
I'm James Whitaker. I have a podcast called Win the Day. And together, Ron and I have a business called We Are Podcast, where we help business owners make a lot of money and help a lot of people using their podcast.
I am Anna Vicino, and I am a voiceover talent and comic. And also, guess what? I have a podcast. I co-host the Fitness Confidential podcast with Vinnie Tortorich for almost 10 years now, and have turned it into best-selling cookbooks. And now I have a food brand, and I'm a huge fan of podcasting, and I'm happy to be here.
I'm Katerina. I produce podcasts for small creative businesses, and I also host a podcast called Creators Abroad, where it's everything about how to make a living as a creative, incidentally combined with navigating foreign contexts, living in a foreign country and traveling.
I'm Nicole Christina. I am the host and creator of Zestful Aging, podcasts heard in 98 countries, including Australia. And I just published a book called Not Just Chatting, How to Become a Master Podcast Interviewer, which is, you guessed it, on Amazon. And I'm happy to be here. Thanks.
My name is Rebecca. I am the host of a podcast called Pleasure Central Radio. And I like to say that we teach people how to get what they want through courage and pleasure instead of suffering and trying really hard.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. So now that you're done, I would love you to do 3 small steps that will help you make money from your podcast. Number 1, if all your previous guests asked you this one question, are you prepared with an answer? The question is, what is the one thing I can do to help you grow your business right now? If you don't have an answer to that question and you don't have a good one, or if you do have a good one as well, this is the exercise I'd love you to do. Spend 20 minutes thinking about that and write down 3 to 4 things you could say the next time someone asks you just that question. Okay, that's number 1. Number 2, do you have a method to sell? Because if you don't have a method to sell, people will use their methods to buy. I heard that from my coach, Taki Moore. So if you don't have a method to sell, whether that is a strategy call, whether it's a 7-day launch, whether it is a landing page, or whatever it is that you do to sell, then that is the next thing I'd like you to fix. The second thing is, what is your method to sell? Finally, 3, make a list of 100 partners. Who are 100 people that if you were associated with in your business in some way would drastically change the opportunities you have to grow? Okay, who are these 100 people? Make a list of them. These are 3 small steps that if you execute, irrespective of where you are at in your business and podcasting journey, will make a huge impact on you making money from your podcast and making it more profitable and more impactful. If this is the first episode you've listened to all the way to the end, or if you're a regular, thank you. I love that you're here. Check out our back catalog on shouldistartapodcast.com. Subscribe to the show and give me a review and rating. It really helps me get found more. And if you're a business owner, podcaster, and want to join others like us in a group where we share tactics and ideas on what's working or not for us when it comes to using our podcast in the best possible way, go to wearepodcast.com/group. It is free. Stay tuned next week when we are going to cover how you can create partnerships with your podcast. This includes joint ventures, sponsorships, distribution partners, credibility partners, and more. So don't forget to subscribe to the show and get that episode as soon as it gets released. Until then, much love. All right. So you stay till the end. You found this useful and you have a business or you have a podcast and a business and you kind of want to make it work for you and grow your business using this podcast. Well, you know what? That's something that I have helped thousands of people do and thousands of businesses do in different forms, through an agency in a one-on-one fashion, through a conference, in a group, and obviously in courses and stuff. So please, I want to be able to give you something that you can use to get recurring results in your business using a podcast. We call it the Recurring Results Roadmap. It is years of putting this in practice. It is the blueprint to get results and recurring results using a podcast. If you'd like that, send me a message, ronsley@gmail.com. I want to hear from you. I want to hear your voice, or want to hear from you. So if you've listened to this and you want that roadmap, please send me an email, ronsley@gmail.com. I want to hear from you. Much love. I'll see you in the next episode.